Okay, can you hear me? All right, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the legislative coffee. I want to make a couple announcements before we get started. First thing, we are recording this and broadcasting this on Facebook Live and the Government Access channel. So if you're talking or asking a question, please be sure to use the microphone so we can get that audio on the broadcast. When we do start taking questions, please just a couple guidelines to follow. First, just ask one question per person at a time. When you're asking that question, be sure it's a question. We want to have plenty of time for everyone in the room to ask their questions and give time for our legislators to answer those questions. So try to minimize your statements and just keep it specific to your questions. Make sure your cell phones are turned off so we don't get interference or interruptions. And I want to thank our sponsors for today. First is the Chamber of Commerce Legislative Action Committee. Thank you for your meetings and putting this all together. Franklin County Farm Bureau Association and AT&T. My name is Ryan Henningsen. I'll be moderating this morning, and I have a helper here to my right. Kaylee Henningsen is going to help us out today too, and Linda Alderman is going to be walking around with the microphone when we start asking our questions. And thank you, obviously, to the City of Ottawa for hosting us here this morning and for helping us broadcast the event this morning. First, I'd like to start out, and we'll just keep it very limited, maybe give you 1 or 2 minutes to talk about turnaround this week and ideas or issues that you think are important for us all to be watching going forward. And I'll just start at the end with Representative Samsel.
Good morning. Thank you, Ryan. Happy to be here. This is for Senator Tyson. It's the second of our doubleheader this morning. We were over in action in Miami County at 7 o'clock this morning, so we appreciate Franklin County's a little bit later start time for our game today. But we did hit, as Ryan noted, turnaround. That's a flurry of activity. We worked, I believe it was 36 bills on Wednesday or Thursday over the course total. But that's where if a bill passes the House of Origin, it's on its way to the other side. Our friends with Senator Tyson over on the Senate side, it's still got a chance to become law. But generally, if it hasn't made it out of the House of Origin, unless it's got some special status, it's probably not going anywhere for the session. So we did just pass that deadline last week. So we look forward to seeing what the Senate has sent our direction and vice versa over the next coming days and weeks. I did want to offer our thoughts and prayers with the people of Ukraine as we're here this morning. I know sometimes as we continue to do these legislative coffees, a breakfast, we work with our neighbors, we knock on doors, we campaign, we fight the good fight. Sometimes it's a vivid reminder like this of why we do what we do. And hopefully at the end of the day, and notwithstanding the disagreements that we do have, we try to find ways to find that common ground. Remember that as Americans, we do have more in common with one another than what tends to push us away from one another sometimes. So I just wanted to offer thoughts and prayers with them this morning. And as we continue forward with this, I think that's probably my 1 or 2 minute, and I'll pass the baton over.
Thank you. Ms. Tyson.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you guys out, and thank you to our sponsors and Ryan and everybody. These don't just happen. It takes a little bit of work to put them together. I would echo the thoughts and prayers with those in the Ukraine and all the military. It's so important to have good leadership, strong leadership, and I think it's being demonstrated now more than ever. I had the opportunity to meet Liberty today, a high school student. I'm glad to see students at these coffees. And her sister's name's Grace. I think those two names are very telling and a good reminder every day, liberty and grace, and that's what we fight for. Turnaround, the Senate had 23 bills above the line the first day. I know the House had 30, but if you think about this, we get the list. The House has a rule that they get it by 5 p.m. the night before. The Senate does not have that rule. I think we need it. We got the list about 6:30 p.m. So most of us, well, not most of us, I can't speak for others, up most of the night reading the bills and trying to make sure that where we're going to be on the policy and if there's any amendments that we could bring forward. We had 11 bills the next day, so we finished 2 days with 34 bills. It's a little bit heavy lift. Disappointingly, none of those bills were tax bills, not one. The Senate's passed out 2 tax bills. One of them is we sent over, because of the fires, there was an effort to remove sales tax on fencing material out in the fires. The Senate amended the legislation to remove all sales tax on fencing permanently. We have surrounding states, Missouri's one that does not charge any sales tax on fencing material. And you know that people were losing those sales across the state line. The other thing is that we added to it was currently if a home is destroyed, local governments can decide to exempt the property tax. But if it's a commercial property or ag property, they have no option to exempt it. You have to pay full property tax on it, even after it's been destroyed. And it's never more obvious in these fires that local governments need the option to be able to abate those properties in a disaster. Hopefully, we can come to some agreement and get that legislation passed. The other tax legislation that's passed the Senate, did you know that you pay sales tax on shipping and postage when you make a purchase? One of you did. Okay, most people don't know that, but in Kansas, you pay sales tax on shipping and postage. That makes no sense to me at all, especially the postage. So the Senate passed a bill, 40-0, went across the consent calendar, actually, to remove that sales tax. And the House is having a hearing on it next week. I'm really excited about that. And one of our good friends just walked in. It's good to see you, George. So thank you guys all for coming out, too. It's so important that we engage. We are a government of the people. And, you know, we're your friends and neighbors. And I love the way that this is supposed to work, a representative government. So thank you, guys.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. As my colleague said, they've kind of plowed the field in terms of turnaround. Bills get out of the House of Origin and accept the bills that are blessed. In recent sessions, we've seen more of the more controversial bills or bills that draw public attention might wait for the second half of the session, and I think that will be the case. And typically, we see tax and budget issues wait till after the April consensus revenue numbers come in. The consensus revenue numbers are the estimate of where we think revenues will be for the state for the coming year. And so we are dealing with a large surplus right now. And are projected to be even larger surplus in the years to come. And so anytime you run a tax bill or a spending bill across a chamber's floor when there's money in the bank, you can bet people have ideas on how to spend it or how to give it back. So there's a reason why that didn't run this week, given the volume of bills that we were trying to get through. So I would echo the comments of both of my colleagues supporting the people of Ukraine against Russian aggression. I think it is telling that we sit here today and are able to talk about public issues without the threat of gunfire, without tanks and missiles flying over our heads and through our community. And I think that speaks highly of our democracy, but it's something we should never take for granted. And we should remember that the people of Ukraine also love their democracy and want to be free. And so I just ask that all of you keep that at top of mind, and if you see the footage of what those folks are going through over there, it's heartbreaking, and we should never take for granted what we have and the sacrifices of the people who secure it for us and serve in our military and armed forces. So with that, I think I'll stop and take any questions anybody wants to throw at us this morning.
Okay, so Linda is going to be walking around with the microphone, so just raise your hand and get our attention, and we'll have Linda come stand by you. And again, just a reminder, please be respectful of everyone's time. Just ask one question so we can make sure we get to everybody in the room, and keep it focused on the question. We do appreciate all of our legislators being here and here to answer questions, but we want to be respectful of their time as well. So, Linda, anyone?
I've got an easy one. How do you define local control?
Yeah, well, I'll start. For me, as a city attorney, it's the notion that enshrined in our Constitution that particularly city governments have authority to opt out of non-uniform enactments and create their own law in those areas. And that's a constitutional amendment that we've had for several decades here in Kansas. And as long as the legislature does not pass something that applies equally to everyone everywhere, cities can opt out and have their own rules in place on something like that. Home rules misapplied sometimes to other entities. Counties are not subject to home rule. Counties are political subdivisions of the state. Counties exist only because the state legislature allows them to exist the way they do. And if the legislature decided to change that, they could. The number of school districts is likewise set by the legislature and could be changed. While school districts under the constitutional amendments of the 1960s have authority to operate and maintain local school districts, the number of them can be set and changed from Topeka. So when we talk about local control, we're talking about several different types of authority for different entities, all of which are lumped into being local. And I think it also depends on the issue, Richard. Are we talking about something like pandemic response? And local control may be different on the spectrum of we'll let locals decide that issue entirely to maybe there's a statewide interest here. Or even things like the recent opioid settlements where we had school districts and cities hiring attorneys to sue on their own behalf. And the Attorney General came to the legislature and said, really, this is much more like the tobacco money. This applies statewide, and it's a harm generally to all citizens of the state. It should not be limited to one school district or one city. So the answer is not as simple as what is it. It's kind of a continuum of local decision-making and state decision-making, and I'll tell you that we have the same question on the other side when it comes to state and federal. How much authority do the states have to decide things, and when can one level of government kind of reach in and say this is how it's going to be done? So.
Yeah, and I'll just follow on that. I actually put a bill in for nullification process for the state of Kansas. We've heard so much about the federal overreach, and what this would do is establish a process so that when we think that the federal government is overreaching, the process would be in place of how you would convey that and get it to the legislature so that we would have a vote on it in order to continue forward, that we agree with the federal government or that we want to opt out of what they're trying to enforce on us. It exists in Utah. They already do it. I know they're trying to pass it in other states too. You guys have heard of the Convention of States, Article 5. Well, this is another way that we could address it more effectively, more quickly, is the nullification process.
And I would just add on that as an example of a local control issue. There's usually some blend of, is there some statewide interest where there's some benefit to having a little bit of consistency or a minimum standard threshold, if you will. I used down in Lynn County, we had wind farms is an example of one of these where it's popped up. Do you want that issue decided entirely within Lynn County and within the county commission at that level or otherwise? Or is that something where some folks brought legislation at the state level to try to put a little bit of basic groundwork in place for it? Or is the best answer maybe a little bit of a blend where the state can adopt some minimum thresholds for notice to property owners, landowners, others out there, but then give most of the decision to the folks at a local level? I tend to believe that most decisions get made best at home. You usually don't get better decisions, and sometimes there's this mentality of we know better that can come out of Topeka or DC. That's not a mindset that I think is a very good one. But so with the wind farm example there, the statewide interest is because on something of that nature, and you've got county lines there where multiple counties may be butting up against others. So for consistency purposes, due process and notice, it might be a good idea to have a little bit of statewide minimum notice requirements in place that need to be followed, but otherwise try to leave a decision like that to the people who actually live and work in the county, if that kind of makes sense a little bit on where a decision may get made. So whether it's state entirely, local, or a mix of the two.
Go ahead, Terry.
Okay, I'll just read this one. I have more to say on it, but this will be the question. While a parent's Bill of Rights for school children sound ethical and honorable, it tends to place one more burden of response on teachers taking away from the classroom instruction and personal time. What is the solution to allowing local school boards to monitor curriculum and allowing teacher more student contact time? And I'm Terry Howard.
Thank you. Ms.
I'll
Tyson, you
I'll
want
be
to start?
glad to pick that up. I'm not familiar with that bill particularly. There's a couple of bills that my husband's had the time to go out and read them, but one bill that I did introduce and co-sponsor was Senate Bill 393. And that's not about a parent's Bill of Rights or anything. It's about transparency in the classroom. And it has been misread. I can't believe how much misinformation and inaccurate information is out there on this legislation. In fact, I'm getting teachers that are saying, well, we can't, we'd have to have a lesson year in a year, we'd have to, all this stuff, that's not accurate if you read Senate Bill 393. I wrote the bill, I know it's not, it says preceding year, and so what it does is the language is the material, title, author, and a version, we're trying to get down to the version of the material, would be listed online and available online for taxpayers and parents to see. So they could see what material was going in the classroom. And the bill requires by the end of the year, if the language remains, by the end of the school year, the teacher would have to have this material posted and updated. Because we all know that things change in the classroom, that they might start out with one list and they may need to change directions during the school year. This bill allows that. It's being coupled and confused with other legislation that's out there that I did not have anything to do with, and I don't know what's in that legislation either. This was not to harm the teachers at all. It was a communication tool between the parents and the tool. The parents and the teachers. It was to allow a window into the classroom of what's being taught. And I'll give you a great example of, and some of you may not see this as an issue, but I just I got an email from a teacher, I replied back, and she replied, I won't go back and forth, but it was kind of odd. Well, I just found out why the teacher was on guard with the language in the bill and her email was because she had asked her students to write, I was told, a paper on what if you were another gender. And the parents were upset about it. So she is definitely has a different perspective than most on this. I would tell you that I also introduced legislation that's not getting talked about much. When I was a freshman in the House, we passed a bill that would, it's a goal to get 65% of the funding to the classroom and the teachers. We could not get past a mandate. I think with everything going on, that people realize how important it is to get that funding to the classroom. So the bill is very simple. It deletes the word goal, and it would make it so that 65% of the K through 12 funding gets to the classroom. That just makes sense. The other bills that I have introduced or been working with others on, one of them would require, I've listened for years, that teachers are paying out of pocket for supplies and resources. That, to me, makes no sense. I watch the billions of dollars being spent on K through 12 funding through state, federal, and local. They have more money in the bank than they've ever had that I'm aware of, and the teachers are still paying out of pocket. This makes no sense. So the bill, it would require up to $250 reimbursement for teachers for school supplies. The second bill to follow up on that is a tax bill. Nobody had thought of this, but what it would be is a tax credit for teachers up to $250 on school supplies. So that could be a total of $500 that teachers could get back in their pocket. I don't think they should be paying a dime out of pocket. I also don't think that students and parents should be paying fees to go to our public schools. We are paying so much in taxes. It does not make sense if you do the math. We're at approximately $15,000 per student base aid across the state. Why are they paying for supplies to enter that classroom? we have to look at the big picture. I'll get into school debt later, but yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question.
Mr. Samsel, do you want to address that question?
Sure, just briefly, I'll add on. I understood, Terry, the two parts of that question. First part of it, allowing local school boards to monitor curriculum, but that kind of dovetails nicely into what we just talked about of local control. A lot of that, I think, should be and could be done at the local level without the folks in Topeka needing to mandate something across the board. So what's working for Wellsville or Ottawa may not be the best solution for Wyandotte County or McPherson County, or depending on what part of the state you're in. So I think that really takes care of a lot of the local school board working with the teachers and parents piece of it. The second aspect of that is teachers allowing them to have more student contact time. And I think a lot of that comes down to what teachers are already very good at anyway, but developing relationships as best they can with the guardians or parents of the students, and really having Topeka stay out of the way in a lot of that stuff, so that they can do what they're best at. And Senator Tyson got into this a little bit, but I have noticed a little bit since I've been in Topeka to be careful sometimes of what your information source is. I think everybody has good intentions for the most part while we're there, but sometimes as we read bills or construe the information, sometimes the lens that we read those things through is not exactly what the bill actually does or what it's intended to do. It's very easy, I think, sometimes to question the motives or intents of folks who we've got different ideas with, especially after we've read about them through a second or third source of information. But I think at the end of the day, everybody wants our schools to succeed, our kids to succeed, our teachers to succeed. And so while we might have disagreements about how that gets done, a lot of the times I think does come back down to local control, and letting our school board members, as you know, they're closest to home, they knock the doors, they get to know the community members, but also administrators and our teachers really do their job that they were trained to do. I know I'm a lawyer, I was not trained in teaching, and so as I've said it before, and in fact I said it this morning, but if I need a good plumber, I'm gonna go ask a plumber to do that type of work. Same with doctor, lawyer, but same comes down to teachers. There are experts in that field.
Okay. Mr. Finch, anything?
Yeah, so there's Senate Bill 393, there's House Bill 2662, both kind of carry that title of Parents' Bill of Rights.
393.
Or 393, sorry.
That's a different bill.
Oh, okay, it's
Yeah.
your bill. There's another Senate bill with the same kind of moniker attached to it. The House bill sets out a series of kind of policy statements that parents have a right to be involved in their children's education, right to inspect curriculum, so on and so forth. It places the onus on the Board of Education to create a parent portal online where that information can be viewed. It does not require teachers to pre-submit lesson plans or submit them for the whole year ahead of time. It's the same kind of June 30, whatever you taught last year is given to the Board of Education to be placed in that portal where parents can see what's going on. So then it has a couple other sections about library books and that sort of thing. That bill did not come to the floor. It was in committee. It's been blessed, meaning it was sent to an exempt committee, and I suspect we'll see more work on it in the second half of the session. So I don't know what the final version will look like, to your point. I will say that as to the second part, one more thing on the first part. It's like we talked at the last legislative coffee. There is a tension right now between parents wanting to be more involved and feeling like there are materials being taught to their children that are either not age appropriate or not reflective of parental values. Karen mentioned one example. We had an example with one of our members in the House whose child was in, I think it was late elementary, early middle, and was given a worksheet with a unicorn about gender change. And the school district in Olathe later had to apologize for that and for what the teacher had distributed. Those things being distributed, that's causing a problem. That's causing parents to say, wait a minute, these schools are not focusing on educating my children. They're focused on a social agenda. And I don't think that's broadly the case. You know, you can take these examples and you know, one or two bad apples kind of thing. But it is a problem when parents say, wait a minute, now I want to see what's going into the classroom. I want to see what my kids are being taught, because that may not align with what I want them to be learning. And I think they want the focus to be on reading, writing, and arithmetic. They want children to be competent in STEAM subjects. They want children that can read and that are prepared for career and college readiness. And they want that to be the focus, not focusing on gender-changing unicorns or having conversations about the teacher's social issues. And so to the extent that that tension exists right now, you're going to see more of this, and more of an effort to say, okay, we need to know what's going on and what's being taught and what our children are being exposed to. And so as to the second piece, what's the solution to allow school boards to monitor curriculum? Curriculum is their responsibility. They do set the local curriculum. They decide through their administrators what's going to be taught and what version of math textbooks we're going to use and what version of social studies textbooks we're going to use. That is the case right now. And I think that's where the responsibility for that should be with the local board. That also means that's where the tension's gonna come to a head first, because parents are gonna go there and say, hey, we wanna have a conversation about this. How do you increase contact time in the classroom? You look at something like year-round school. I don't know how you make out the case that kids can't go home for the weekend without a backpack full of snacks because they're not going to eat, and then say we're going to cut them loose for 3 months every summer and they're going to be fine. Kids can't go home for 3 months and not have a summer slide. And so we end up, and you teachers in the room know this, you end up spending the first month or two teaching these children all the things that they'd forgotten over the summer because they haven't been in the classroom. We've got to find a better way to do this. Most of these children are not out plowing fields in the summertime. They're not out working the farm, and education needs to change with the technical reality of where we are today. Kids sit at home playing video games all summer. They're not learning, they're not getting on their laptop and working remotely, and we've got to get with the time. So if we want to change that, I highly recommend that teachers and administrators sit down and have an honest conversation about changing the hours requirement, or at least the way we deliver education to children, so we're not sending them home for 3 months when we can't dare send them home for a 3-day weekend for fear that they might not make it back. So that's what needs to change if we want to change contact time.
So is the summer going home playing video games a parent problem or a teacher problem?
I think it's both. No, wait a minute. No, it's a fair question. Let's talk about it. It's a fair question. But if educators want to say to parents, we're the professionals, we know what's best, you shouldn't question us on curriculum choices, then shouldn't that continue year round?
Yeah, I agree with all your
Okay.
I do.
I just have a follow-up. I do appreciate that you support putting more money back in teachers' pockets because they do spend a lot. And I wonder what would be the purpose of having everything from the preceding year? I mean, our curriculum is already, a parent can come and look at our curriculum. I don't know a teacher who doesn't communicate with parents about what they're doing the next week, what standards they're focused on. And then I think it's the HB 2662, one of them I read about the library books. It said, if I read it right, that every library book either purchased or published after 2017 would have to go through a parent committee to be approved before it could be put in our libraries. And I, as a librarian and a teacher, I have a real problem with censorship. If I don't want my child to read that, then when they bring it home, I say, we're going to talk about this, but I don't want you to read this. But I think that that's my job as a parent to look, or a grandparent to look at that, but it's not the school's job to censor it.
So,
Sorry, that was too many questions.
no, it was fine. I'll just briefly touch on it. I'm not familiar with the library bill. The only bill I had was the transparency. It was the material being listed. I did recommend during testimony that it be changed so that they address it at the semester, when they start the semester, and then they had till the end of the year to post it. And if you think about it, you may not be aware of it. Some of these school districts are already doing it. The material is online. There's applications that are being used. I think Ottawa is one of them that would satisfy this requirement. However, we have 286 school districts throughout the state, and not all of them are making this material available to the parents. I had one parent teacher tell me that you couldn't even visit, I couldn't visit, a parent could not visit the school or the classroom. And I don't know if that's a result of COVID or what has happened, but they're not letting them into the classroom. So different things are happening throughout the state. So we're trying to set parameters that work throughout the state, but without micromanaging. At least that's my goal. I don't think the state should micromanage. I agree that the parents and the locals should have the say over the material that's being taught. But also taxpayers should be able to have that material available too, not just the parents. Because it's impacting. One of the examples I gave, and this is just an odd example that I would have never dreamed would have happened, but it was a parent teacher. I was talking to her, and she said that in elementary school, her kids were not taught long division. And she didn't know it. She wasn't aware of it. And the kids get up to high school and trying to do algebra, polynomial equations, and they didn't know how to do long division to solve the problem. The teacher, and she used a term that I didn't know, I don't know the lingo, but fidelity. She said there has to be fidelity in the classroom, that we build off of what's taught in elementary school. You guys know this. It builds and it impacts. Well, one teacher in the lower levels didn't realize that that long division had an impact in the out years. So I think there's some positives that could come from this too. Is the material being available, and not the material itself. The parents would have to take it upon themselves to see the title. Then they'd have to go either to the school or research it and find the material. The material itself is not posted. We get into copyright laws if we do that.
So you're saying that as a parent, I would look at the preceding year and see what my child has been taught to make sure that they have been taught something? Well, I just don't
No,
understand
we're-
what the purpose would be.
We're asking that it be listed up front, but giving you the opportunity to change it because materials change throughout the year. So it was to try to give teachers that flexibility, but make sure that the information's still available.
So as a parent, I could go and say, I don't want my student to learn this. I see that they're going to do this in November.
Can you use the microphone?
So as a parent, I could look at the list and say, I see you're going to do this in November. I don't want my child to do this. I just don't understand what the purpose would be.
The purpose is so that they will know what's being taught in the classrooms. And then part of the 393 bill, it has to define the process for reviewing the materials that the school does for the materials. Then the parent can go to look at the process and see whom they talk to find out, to address whatever their question or concern might be.
Okay. Did we have any other questions over here? Yep. Go ahead. Maya.
My question is about the ad valorem tax. The ad valorem is not a tax. It's money that was promised by the legislature to the cities and the counties. But years ago, the legislature chose not to fund that and is no longer funding that. Now that the state is flush with cash, would the state consider giving the money back to the cities and the counties? The cities and the counties have lost over $2 billion in ad valorem taxes that were not provided by the legislature.
Well, do you want me to? It's
start,
LAVTR,
yeah.
demand transfers. I find this interesting. And they've lost $2 billion. Okay, it's state money, state taxpayer money, being transferred to local county governments to keep property taxes down. Our property taxes have been going through the roof. We're some of the highest in the nation. In fact, Allen County, rural Allen County, is considered the highest in the nation for rural property taxes. I don't think LAVTR would have made a difference on that. Part of it is how we're, let me address LAVTR. There's actually been a bill in the Senate introduced to remove it because it hasn't been paid, that money has not been transferred. And I've supported legislation that would transfer it, that would send it to the local governments. But it's not happening, so let's just get it off the books. What we can do to save taxpayers on property tax is the state collects 1.5 mil. 1 mil goes to the regions and 0.5 goes to other buildings and facilities. It's at less than $70 million right now. And approximately the LAVTR, I think, would have been $78 million or something last year. So let's use that money, that LAVTR money, and truly lower property taxes by getting rid of that 1.5 mil. It would remove property taxes on your vehicles too. All your property taxes would decrease 1.5 mil. It may not seem like much, but it's a savings to people, and it's managing the money properly.
Yeah, so the local ad valorem tax reduction fund, LAVTR, has not been funded in over 10 years. Yeah, and probably longer than that. Even when it happened, I think for Ottawa, it was less than a mill's worth, maybe right at a mill's worth of property tax. It wasn't a lot. And I'm not sure what it was for the county, but same. When you're talking about 150 mills for property tax, which is what somebody in the city of Ottawa might look at on their total mill levy, that's all in, school, county, city. Knocking off a mill is not the big difference you would think. I mean, we're talking less than 1% property tax reduction. I mean, even knocking off a mill and a half from the state, it's something, but if people really want property tax relief, we're going to have to talk much more broadly about what we're going to do. LAVTR is not going to do it. So I don't think it's going to come back. I think the reality is that you're putting money in and saying, hey, reduce property tax, but it just means that it frees up money over here to spend on something else, and it doesn't actually lead to property tax reduction. The largest property tax increases Kansas has seen in the last decade has been school districts, which would not receive LAVTR. So we have seen school spending increase much faster than cities and counties combined. So, or right at cities and counties combined, should say. So about 50% on schools and about 50% cities and counties divided. So I don't see it coming back.
I appreciate the question. I touched on it last month and then talked about it this morning again. The LAVTR, I hope, is something that we find a way to bring back for rural counties in particular. Every county in Kansas, we've got to fund our courthouses, our highways, all of those basics that each county has. One of the things that I like about living in rural Kansas is we don't need the nice, new, shiny, state-of-the-art buildings that a lot of our friends in other parts of the state might have, but we do need them to be functional and operational. And by finding ways, this is a great example where we live right here. We have a lot of folks who live in our neighborhoods, but then drive up to a much larger business community across the county line. But those are tax sources that the business sources that county is able to enjoy to help pay for their county services that they've got there that we can't enjoy, whether it be Anderson County, Franklin County, and some of our smaller counties. So I hope that's something that we continue to find a way to address, even if it's not the LAVTR fund program, because those are things that would help a lot of the folks that don't have incomes and rising incomes, but yet their property tax bills keep going up every month. I know, and I mentioned this last time, but when I knocked on doors, property tax was the number one overriding issue when it was compared to sales tax or income tax. I know we're in a campaign year, and so that's maybe one of the reasons that the food sales tax has popped up. But I don't know that in the overall grand scheme of things, if we were looking to make more longer-term permanent changes that's going to help folks across the board here in my district, that property tax and finding a way to deal with those basic core functions that our counties provide, if that wouldn't be the best relief as we consider those things long-term.
I have a question.
Okay.
I know there is a movement afoot up in Topeka to increase the COLA on capers. That hasn't been done in 24 years. Where is that going, or where is it now?
I'm not on any of those committees, so I haven't seen the legislation yet.
No, I don't. Every year, there's a bill introduced to do a COLA for capers. It doesn't happen. Capers, remember, is a defined benefit plan. You sign up knowing this is what you're going to get based on what you made at the time that you retire. It's not built to have COLAs. That would be a different type of retirement plan. And So it comes up every year, and it doesn't happen every year, and partly because the plan's not designed for it. The other part of that is because the plan's not fully funded yet. And right now, the discussion is paying off a $252 million layering payment that would save the state millions of dollars in interest, because we go ahead and basically pay ourselves back, because when we borrowed from Capers years ago, that layering payment is paid back with interest that equals the projected rate of return for the pension system. So that should be the top priority, paying that back. And then, since we are looking at a surplus this year, going ahead and putting more money into Capers to increase our funded liability. And we believe, in the House anyway, that we can get to 80% funded liability for the state's pension system by the end of this budget year, which would be huge. When I came to Topeka, it was in the low 50s. And pension folks try to make it easy for us non-financial folks to understand, so they make a little stoplight analogy, and we were solidly in the red. We are creeping up towards yellow, and north of 80 is green. So if we could have that back to green, I would rather do that than give a COLA that feels good to give, but doesn't actually increase the security of the state's pension system.
Okay. Any
I'll
Any other
talk a
hands?
little bit
Go
about
ahead.
capers, if that's
Okay.
okay. We do, you know, we have some people going around saying that they've saved capers. Well, if they've saved it, then why are we still talking about it? I mean, that's a harsh reality. I used to work on the TSP system, the Thrift Savings Plan. Are some of you familiar with that? A few of you. Okay, that system has made more millionaires than any other retirement system in the nation. The capers, we need to look at what we've done, what past legislature has done, is it's a pyramid. And they continue to, if you don't build out that base, you don't have the funding to support the pyramid. We need to actually convert that system. And that conversion to a TSP type or a 401k type system would get us off of the issue of COLAs. It would get us into financial stability. It would save the taxpayers much money, because we wouldn't have the level of maintenance that we do with capers now. It just makes sense. Now, we don't make it a mandatory conversion. Any new employee coming on, then they would be mandatory to be in that system. But we would allow any current state employee the option to convert to a TSP 401k type model. If you're an older employee, you probably wouldn't want that conversion. You'd probably stay where you're at. But the younger ones, the benefit for converting could absolutely, it would be to your benefit to convert. And we have the money to do that now. As Blaine said, you know, revenue estimates are supposed to be $1.9 billion above what they anticipated coming in. That's a huge number. That's with a B, not with a million. So we need to, the tax interim committee, which I chaired this summer or fall, we actually came up with, don't increase spending this year. Don't go out and spend all this money. Instead, buy down the debt and then give some tax relief but be common sense about it. If we increase spending, then we're gonna create programs and spending levels that we may not be able to support with what's coming in the future.
Yeah. Linda?
I'm just asking this because I don't know, and I have family members who are in the Kansas Police and Fire. Is it funded different? So it's a different, okay. So you wouldn't think of changing that to a,
No, we would give them the option too.
We've seen in recent years, Deidre, we've seen a lot more entities want to go into KPUF. Correctional officers and, anybody who touches on public safety wants to get into KPUF. Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Richard.
Where were you at with the rolling back the sales tax on food? And I think I saw part now and fully in 23 or 24.
There's several different pieces of legislation out there, and the interesting thing about tax on food is define food, okay? To me, food is anything that's edible, anything you can eat, but that's not how it's usually termed in legislation. So I've seen several different pieces of legislation. The Senate, I would consider, we passed out of committee what the governor asked for. Be careful what you ask for, you may get it. It removes sales tax on all food, including restaurant food. And it gives locals an option to remove sales tax completely. So you could literally get to zero sales tax on food with that legislation. Now, there's other ideas out there. I know the House, the Senate, the House Tax Committee, they've got a new tax chairman over there. He is great to work with. I love it. We bounce ideas off of each other and talk, and he's got a good piece of legislation I'll let these guys talk about. And then I had a constituent send me an email on an idea that all sales tax on food goes to 2%. I thought, well, that's something to consider. So I think we might take a look at that equation and those numbers. You know, we've got to figure out where we're at. I'll ask this group, you guys, if you don't mind. We've got three major taxes in the state of Kansas: is income tax, sales tax, and property tax. So which would you rather see? Sales tax on food decreased, your income tax to decrease, or your property taxes to decrease? You want to show hands? Income tax. Sales tax on food, okay, and then property tax. That's interesting. Yeah, it usually comes out, property tax is the higher one, and then sales tax, and then income tax. But it just kind of shows you where we're at. And I'll tell you real quickly, I do study the numbers. I dig into this stuff probably more than most. But if we would increase the standard deduction for a family, say, it's currently at $8,000, we could double that to $16,000. And you know you're not spending $8,000 on sales tax on food. And that fiscal note for the state would be less than removing the governor's bill or any of the tax legislation that's been proposed on lowering food sales tax. So that's something to consider. We need to look at the big picture and how we're going to impact the state. I think that we get, you know, it's going to play out. Blaine was right. We need the numbers. But what my disappointment is in the Senate side, I'm not going to speak to the House side, but those tax bills, we bring those above the line to take the temperature of where the body is and where we need to go with tax legislation. And so the longer we put that off, the more difficult it can be in establishing that equation. It can be done. I've done it. We've done it for years. But to me, it's get the plan out there and figure out where we're going to be for a state. There's another piece of legislation that you guys might not know about on property tax is the 20 mil that the state requires. You may not realize, but the valuation of your property, the first $20,000 is abated for homeowners. The Senate, actually a representative came to me and asked me to put the legislation in, and we did. We passed out the bill. It would abate the first $65,000 of the value of your home. So you would subtract that off the top, and then we put in equations so that it would increase on inflation every year. And the reason we landed at $65,000 was because this bill, the language was established in 1997, and we did the math and figured out where we would be if we would have been increasing that for inflation every year. It's just common sense legislation that would help give everybody a break on their property taxes. Not everybody, homeowners, sorry. I need to clarify, sorry.
Yeah, I think, Richard, you're more likely to see not a full repeal of sales tax on food this year. I think you'll see some partial, and hopefully some reduction generally in sales tax. Like I said, at the last legislative coffee, it stayed up 0.3 of a point higher than it was supposed to be back in 2015. It should have come down. I'd still like to see that promise kept and see that reduction happen. So,
Hi, Judy Davis Cole. I really don't have a question, but as you were talking about the priorities of taxes to attack first, I just want to say there are an awful lot of people in the state that don't own property. So if you're dealing with property taxes and reducing those, it doesn't hit everybody. When everybody has to eat and pay for food and taxes on food, that should be the priority. That is, of course, just my opinion. Thank you.
sure. I want to reiterate something, too, that Senator Tyson said, and appreciate that perspective, Judy, that, you know, the devil's in the details. How are you going to define food? Are you going to include fast food? Are you going to include, you know, candy, pop? You know, there's people that want to just do WIC foods, in other words, like produce and meat and bread and dairy, and others that want everything. And then you end up with food manufacturers here in the state. There's two, Frito-Lay and Mars, right there in Topeka, who want to make sure that Doritos and M&Ms are also exempt from sales tax. And so it gets very difficult when you start having those conversations. I also want to say that lest we think this is, you know, a panacea and it's really going to help, grocery is one of the thinnest margin businesses in the United States. If you take off that sales tax on food, you allow for expansion of prices. And I think that's probably what you'll see. If all of a sudden the grocery bill goes down 6%, the grocer's going to eat into some of that margin and say, oh, I'll take back a couple percent on that. And they would that's business. That's what you're going to see. You'll see prices escalate. You're seeing that anyway through inflation. But
I'm on the hospital board, and before the legislator says that we have to, the city and the county has to reduce ours to zero, our hospital is funded by a 0.5% sales tax, and they would be hurting badly to reduce that. So I think make sure that you consider what all of those are used for before you say, no, you can't.
And I think what the good senator said is that then locals could reduce to zero on that one segment. But believe me, once if the state takes off 6.5% and everybody's still paying tax when they go to the grocery store, why am I still paying tax? They'll start coming to the city commission meetings. They'll start coming to the county commission meetings and say, why aren't you taking this off too? And locals are far more dependent on sales tax revenue for a number of things than the state is in what we do. So, yeah, it's again, there are a lot of unintended consequences that people need to think through. It sounds wonderful. It sounds great. We'll just reduce sales tax or eliminate sales tax on food, and everybody will be able to buy more groceries. Their lives will be easier. That is an election year slogan that does not hold up when you actually scrutinize it.
Well, and I'll bring up that the governor's vetoed it in 2 different bills. This governor vetoed it. It's been attempted for several years now. First year I was aware of was when I was in the House, but
More modest reductions, and she vetoed those.
yeah,
so
she vetoed those.
So if there's one more question, we probably have time for one more.
My colleagues are just getting warmed up. They've already done 2 of these. So. Anybody? Read us one, Ryan. Let's do one more.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stick on this topic real quick, and this be maybe a chance to wrap up. And I know you all mentioned that we haven't seen a lot of tax legislation come through yet, but with this conversation we just had, and with the discussion of potential surpluses in our budget, maybe just talk big picture. As far as conversation around a taxpayer refund this year because of that excess, or ideas that maybe you're hearing in legislation that could be best uses for this current large surplus that we foresee happening. And Mr. Sampson, I'll just let you start.
Sure, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to remember that this money came from the taxpayers and it belongs to the taxpayers. That's first and foremost. The doors that I've knocked on, as I've said before, and for as long as I serve, I'll continue to say, but I remember the folks who have given heartfelt stories about how hard it is to earn that money, and they fought for our country. And so those are the things, anytime we're doing things in Topeka, whether it's corporate income taxes all the way down to whether we're talking about sales tax, property tax, income tax, all of those things, they all tie together. The issues that I don't think we've quite touched on yet, though, that I hope get more discussion as we move forward, and sometimes this is a little bit on the other end of the money, but healthcare, starting a small business, one of the largest obstacles to going out on your own and doing something. How do we get people affordable healthcare access so that they can cover themselves, so that they can go be entrepreneurial, and still provide the coverage and support they need for their family and loved ones? I know that Medicaid expansion is not the most popular avenue to go down that route, but it is an avenue that warrants discussion, and why so many other states in this country have already done it. And if it's not that good, let's find something better so that we can find ways to get away from this employer-based system that's not working for a lot of parts of our state and our country right now. A second one would be mental health parity laws, finding ways that, so for when folks need help with mental health, whether that they're going to the hospital here in Ottawa or Garnett, but finding ways that they can get help and coverage for things that on the front end and be proactive with it so that they can keep their productivity level and maintain their quality of life. But that is going to take an investment if it working with the public-private partnership. But those are things that government should be looking at. Another one that we haven't got done yet is medical marijuana. That enjoyed, when I surveyed my district, a very large number of support. Which was in contrast to recreational marijuana. That was down in the 30s, but medical marijuana was up in the high 80s. So those are things we can look at for the state. And then the last one I get asked about a lot is sports betting. The gambling laws that we've got here in Kansas, to try to make that effective for Kansas and find ways to get that done. But those are all things as we talk about putting money back into taxpayers' wallets. I don't know that a one-time payment is the best way to go about those things. I think I'd rather try to find ways, kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier, whether it's the LAVTR, but making sure we get the best use of our taxpayer dollars if we're going to spend it. But if not, also look at other ways where we generate that revenue through some of those other things, medical marijuana, sports betting, or other things that we can help people get their small businesses up and running, and find ways to help them provide insurance for their families and their employees.
Well, thank you. One-time money, I don't think is the fix. I think we need to look at long-term solutions. And so that's what we're trying to do through tax and through decreasing spending. The Senate Tax Committee next week is actually going to go over our fiscal finances, where we're at. We're going to look at the budget. We're going to look at what our obligation spending is and what our debt is. You may not be aware of this, but it doesn't count all debt. This just counts what they consider the state general fund debt, bonding debt. And we're over $1,400 per person per capita in the state of Kansas. And if you look at our surrounding states, Colorado's a little bit over $700 per capita. Nebraska, $18. They're not in debt. Kansas is not supposed to be in debt. So we need to take a look at the big picture of how we're managing our finances and going forward as a state. I would also, since we're closing, really quickly, we've got a constitutional amendment on the ballot, August 2nd, 2022, value them both. It establishes that abortion legislation is dealt with the legislature, not the court writing legislation from the bench. So that is on the ballot, August 2nd, 2022. Thankfully, the House passed a resolution on rules and regulations. It will be a constitutional amendment. Hopefully the Senate can get it passed. And it'll be in your hands to decide. But when we write legislation, we turn over to the departments and agencies legislative authority through rules and regulations. And sometimes they interpret it or misinterpret it in a manner that the legislature did not want. And so we would like the authority to bring that back and to make sure that that authority stays with the legislature, not completely with the administration. The other constitutional amendments that are going to be discussed this year, I don't know when they'll get on the ballot or if they'll get passed, but one of them is regarding tax and tax increases. The Senate President has asked for that resolution, and we'll be working on that this year also. The other one I've heard that we're going to take up is the judicial selection. You may not think that we need some Senate or legislative oversight with judicial selection, but I'll give you a prime example. An appellate court judge was appointed by this governor. And if we wouldn't have changed the law to have Senate oversight for that appointment, that person would have gone directly on the bench. But what happened was that person that the governor appointed did not receive one yes vote. It wasn't bipartisan. There was not one yes vote received. So we need that second set of eyes basically looking at our state Supreme Court justices, and hopefully we'll give you guys the opportunity to change our state constitution on that. Thank you guys for coming out, and thank the sponsors.
So as I recall, the question was about the tax refund, the $250 per person, $500 for married couple. So I'll start with that. I put that in the same category as the governor suddenly deciding she wants sales tax reduction on food. That's more of an election year, gambit to shore up support and give a one-time check. Federal stimulus in the national economy is one of the factors leading to inflation across the board and making it harder for people who don't make a lot of money to survive. And I don't think a state-level copy of that program is what we need. Putting in more cash into the system right now is just going to infuse it with more cash and lead to further price increases and make it harder for people who are struggling. So I don't support that. There are a ton of things that we could do that would be more meaningful long-term. We've talked about a lot of them this morning. Let's get capers above 80%. Let's pay off some bonds that the state has outstanding and do some debt reduction and save our interest costs in the future. Shore up a rainy day fund and have a working reserve in case things turn bad. We saw it last year with the winter storm, the incredible price increases that occurred. And because the state had some idle funds, we were able to provide help to cities and counties and ratepayers across the state. We need to have a rainy day fund so that we can help when things like that happen. I think we need to look at different tax policy. I said sales tax on everything should come down. And we can bring it down. We have the means to do that. We should look at increasing the standard deduction. It's since the federal law has changed, we should look at changing that as well. We need to look at taxing Social Security income less. Right now, at $75,000, we tax that. It's a disincentive for older people to live in our state, disincentive for them to work after retirement, and we need to be utilizing the expertise and experience of people who are older throughout our state. And should not be penalizing that. I think we need to look at advanced energy in our state. Oklahoma is vying to become a hydrogen hub with Louisiana on kind of the cutting edge of energy. We need to be right there talking about that. Hydrogen storage in Kansas is cheaper than anywhere else in the continental United States. We need to be on the vanguard of those kinds of advanced energy solutions and be spending money and making investments to get us there. We talk about the 988 bill. There's money smart money that we can spend to help mental health, to help people in crisis, and we should be doing that. And we've increased funding for mental health services over the last several years, so including a gubernatorial veto override that we did a couple of years ago on that. So all of those things, to my mind, represent a better use of money than writing people a $250 check at a time when inflation is spiking and energy prices are going up. So that's the way I see it. We've got a lot of session left. We've got a lot of big issues, budget and tax. As the senator mentioned, the constitutional amendment on rules and regs, I wish we could have talked more about that this morning. That was kind of an exciting couple days in the House. The question that's framed here is not correct. Right now, it does not take a 2/3 majority to override a rule or regulation. It takes an entire bill that goes through the system and is signed or vetoed by the governor. It would only take 2/3 if the governor vetoed it. The amendment that if the Senate passes it, that you'll be presented with is, do you want the legislature to be able to create a mechanism to claw back a rule or reg if it goes too far? And probably the way we would see that done is just by the passage of a concurrent resolution in both houses by a simple majority. That's what was proposed back in 1983. So happy to talk about any or all of those things next time we're together, and I wish we had a little more time to get into some of them this morning. Really want to thank our sponsors. Want to thank Ryan and Kaylee for holding down the fort over here. She did a great job, and thank all of you for being here this morning.
Oh, go ahead.
I know we've got a lot of student athletes out in Hayes and Salina, Kansas, that are tuning in this morning to watch our legislative coffee while they're out competing at the state tournament. So I wanted to give them a shout out and wish them the best of luck, safe travels back and forth, and then of course our basketball teams as we gear up into the postseason, wish them good luck. So thanks, our host.
Thank you, and thank you to you all for being here again. We know you do this voluntarily, and we appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for showing up. Our next coffee will be April 2nd at 10 a.m. Don't think probably back here from a location standpoint. And again, just want to thank City of Ottawa for hosting us and broadcasting. And again, our sponsors were Chamber of Commerce, Legislative Action Committee, Franklin County Farm Bureau, and AT&T. So